Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. For the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. Zola Levitt presents Considering the Times and Seasons of Our World Today. Here's Zola Levitt.
Shalom. Hello again. I have to take a moment to introduce our guest tonight because she's really very special. We've had her before. It's Joan Peters, historian, journalist. If you'll forgive me, the biography is so long and complex, I need to actually read from it. First off, she's the author of the prize-winning book, From Time Immemorial, The Origins of the Arab-Jewish Conflict Over Palestine. This is the book. It's in most bookstores where they can order it, but it's it's a wonderful book. Don't start reading this when you go to bed. It's a page-turner. It's in current demand, used as a textbook in the United States and Israel. Ms. Peters served as a White House advisor on American foreign policy in the Middle East during the Carter administration, which was quite a time for that. She's lectured at the U.S. State Department, foreign policy institutions in the U.S. and abroad. She's conducted fact-finding missions to Israel, Syria, Egypt, and other areas, produced a series of CBS News documentaries about the wars in the Middle East, has acted as a foreign affairs correspondent on public television. She has contributed to Harper's, Commentary, The New Republic, The New Leader, and other periodicals. She is currently an advisor, trustee, and executive committee member of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, based in New York. Joan Peters, thank you for stopping by.
Oh, it's my pleasure, always.
Look, since your book came out, you're the middle of a lot of conflict and argument, debate, and the first subject we were talking before the program about George Orwell and his way back in 1948, his book where he introduced the term newspeak, and you've kind of taken that term and using it on the spin we're getting today with the situation in Israel and the Palestinians, and you call it turnspeak.
Yes, because it's different than newspeak. Turnspeak is what has developed in the world as an excuse for an Arab case, because there is no Arab case for Israel. And the Arabs have literally stolen the identity of the Jews to create a case for themselves, and in so doing, they've created a turnspeak. They've turned everything on its head, and that's where my term came from, turnspeak.
You know, I let me reiterate this part of your history that I remember from when you were with us before. You went over there originally on the other side of the question. You went to defend the Arab position, to write something. You're a historian, you're a professional at digging out the real facts. And when you got there, you changed sides because you found a lot of turnspeak.
Yeah, well, it isn't so much that I changed sides. I was an old civil rights activist, and I had thought that the Arab refugees were in the same kind of plight that the African Americans had been as slaves and who were in the South.
Oh yeah,
and
they
it looked like
this,
a similar. It's a kind of similar packaging.
Yeah.
And I went to the camps in Lebanon, and I saw the differences from what I'd thought, and I realized that the Arab, well, there were so many layers upon layers, that it's quite scary, because that's how we've gotten this equal sort of, what do we call it? Is it a moral equivalency?
Yeah.
Moral equivalency.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like saying that Hitler was as equally guilty as the Jews, whom he burned to death, or he did whatever he did to. For some reason, there has been a blind spot in the world since 1948. Well, it's not some reason. It's because there's been a huge amount of very active blinding.
Yeah. You were going to read a passage
I would
in
love
turnspeak.
to.
Yeah, this is fascinating the way
yes. It's from my book, and it's in the conclusion, and it's after I've done an awful lot, 10 years of research and putting together, but I'll just read this one brief bit to you, and then I'll take it apart. All the myths surrounding the Arab Palestinians are based on the same premises. One, the Palestinian people have had an identity with the land. Well, let's stop right there. First of all, the use of the term Palestinian people as being Arabs is an immediate public relations coup. Because by calling them Palestinians, they immediately are identified with Palestine, and if they are identified with Palestine, then Israel is not. And if you say in 1948 Palestine became Israel, it appears that the Jews took over Palestine from the Arabs. But there were no Arab Palestinians. There never was an Arab Palestine. The only Arab Palestine that existed and exists is Jordan.
Yes.
And the kingdom of Jordan became Palestine, but the king of Jordan, King Abdullah, was assassinated for saying that Jordan was Palestine, even though it's 75% of the entire Palestinian mandate. That's the first, very first part of this very short paragraph. The second, that identity, meaning the Palestinian Arab identity, has been present for, quote, thousands of years, unquote.
Yeah.
It has never been present. There has never been a Palestinian identity. In fact, the Arabs would not be called Palestinians.
No, they didn't want that term back when it was in 1948. They said, well, you're Palestinian. They said, no, the Jews are Palestinians.
Yes, they said we are Syrians, we are Southern Syrians, we are anything but Palestinians.
Yeah.
We will call ourselves Ottomans, Turks, but don't call us Palestinians. The Palestinian brigade that the British was able to muster in the mandatory period and in the war was the Jewish brigade.
Yeah, they were Jewish soldiers.
Yes. Well, so much for the second one. 3, the alien Jews, quote, returned after 2,000 years, unquote, in 1948 to displace the Palestinian Arabs in the new Jewish state. Okay, well, that's a lot. The alien Jews, first of all, the Jews were not alien. Even the most hostile British reports that were available, like the Peel Commission report, which did actually trace Jewish history back in the Holy Land, all of them said that there's always been a Jewish presence in the Holy Land.
Yes.
And that the Jews never left.
How could the Jews be alien to Israel? There's the only country in the world that really is identified with the people, Israel and the Jews.
Exactly.
More so than we white European immigrants are with North America, say.
Well, it's exactly right. And it's hard to imagine, but that is what they're called now. You've seen the publicity as much as I have.
Yes.
You've seen the kind of handouts we get
yeah.
when we go to the State Department. You've seen how they call them alien.
Yeah.
And the Arabs are the natives.
The natives, yeah.
And we'll go on with that one. It's the alien Jews returned after 2,000 years in 1948 to displace the Palestinian Arabs. I will stop there. To displace the Palestinian Arabs, okay? The displaced persons in the Middle East were not the Arabs. They were the Jews.
Yes.
There were 900,000 or so who were forced to flee without their property from Arab countries in 1948. Nobody knows about the Jewish refugees.
Yes.
They are displaced.
They were chased out of Arab countries.
They were, for fear of their lives.
Yeah.
But the Arabs who are called refugees, and this started can I do a little bit of deviating from this?
Joan, you're free to say what you like on this program.
The idea of displacement of Arabs was one of the driving forces that started me on this book, because I thought they had been. And a number of things have suddenly become very clear in the process of writing this book. It wasn't so sudden, it was 10 years. But what was the first thing that ever happened, do you think? It was a slight definition change in the United Nations archives. Mm-hmm. And the definition change was so overwhelming that I didn't even pay attention to it the first time. The definition of a refugee in the world is that any person who has been forced to flee from their livelihood and their lands from time immemorial, who has lived there a long time, will in fact be qualifying as a refugee. Oh. They have long-lived status in the country they left.
Okay.
And in the case of 1948, the Arabs actually had a separate Arab refugee agency called UNRWA, just for Arab refugees from Israel, not from anywhere else. The rest of the world, and there were 50 million refugees who were created, the need was incredible after the Second World War, so that there were enormous numbers of refugees. They were all under the rubric of a World Refugee Organization, except for the Arab refugees from Israel. They created a special agency. And in that agency, and in that definition, they changed the definition of refugee for Arab refugees from Israel to any person who had been in Israel 2 years before 1948.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, it suddenly came to me, and I went back to this definition change, and I thought, how could they do a definition change that was so United Nations oriented and had to be inclusive of so many thousands of people for it to happen, when, in fact, these people are long-lived natives from time immemorial?
Uh-huh.
And it turned out, going into the UN archives, that these Arab refugees, who were not called Palestinians at that time, the Arab refugees had indeed fled from other Arab countries to follow on the Jews' tail, to get the benefits, to get all of the varying qualities that were in the Jewish settlements that were not in Arab countries.
So, to wrap it up, the Arabs were not long-lived in Israel.
And they weren't displaced.
And they weren't displaced. The United Nations accommodated them by saying if you just had 2 years in the land, well, then you're a refugee from it, and accommodated Arabs that had almost just arrived with the Jews.
There's nothing wrong with that, you know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with an Arab wanting to better himself.
Not at all, but...
And a nomadic tribe is... we studied about nomads in high school. We know that there are wandering peoples in the desert.
Yes.
It's a very noble profession to
Yes,
wander
yes.
and find your land where you can and move on. But not when it's at the expense of a whole people. Not when they're about to steal the entire persona of the one Jewish country in the world.
Yeah. She's Joan Peters. She has so much to say. I hope we'll be able to get it said, but she's the author of From Time Immemorial. You really need to read the original. And she's what is called in the business source material. You know, in our newsletter, we quote different, I don't know, Cal Thomas and Joseph Farah, different authors, Daniel Pipes and so on, who we rely on and trust and who are, they say things in editorials and we repeat them and we quote them. But they're not exactly source material. They, in turn, look at Joan Peters and people like her book, her research, her life's work to get their ideas. She is source material, and I'm glad we can bring her to you today. Back with her after this.
Explore the Bible. Experience Jerusalem. Find new life in the Jordan. Set sail in Galilee. Make your trip to Israel with Zola Levitt. For tour information, call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377.
Well, you know, that's the way we see Israel on our programs. You know, when you tour it and go to biblical sites, you don't run into all this politics, but it is certainly an educational experience. You know, Israel's usually ahead of things, and Isaiah spoke about turnspeak, Joan, 3,000 years ago, almost. In Isaiah 5:20, he says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil." Isn't that turnspeak?
Wow.
These peace plans that we're seeing, people are persuaded by the roadmap. Evidently, our tours are getting larger, but what do you think about these oncoming peace plans?
Well, they're fine, except that there's only one party to them, and you can't have a peace plan for one party.
Yeah, that's right. The Israelis have done what they're supposed to under the roadmap, as far as I can see.
The roadmap is absolutely dead. It was dead before it started, because the fallacious premise of all the peace plans that have been proposed is that the Arabs are ready to make peace of some sort with Israel or accept it in some future date. And up until the present, and I believe into quite a long time in the future, until there's some reform of Islam, there will not be a possibility of a peace plan, because there have to be two parties who, in some way, agree to agree.
And it seems like almost propaganda to say there needs to be a Palestinian state in the middle of Israel. This will cause peace. You have any confidence in that?
Of course not. They don't want a Palestinian state in Israel. They want Israel. They want a Palestinian state wherever there is a Jewish land. And if it wasn't there, it would be wherever it was, the Arabs would want it. The Palestinians are an invention of the Arab League. The Palestinians did not exist. They are a wonderful group of human beings, just like any other group, before they got indoctrinated by their schools into hating and killing Jews. That was fine. But today, the Palestinians do have a land. Even if they don't deserve it, they have one. They have 3/4 of Palestine, called Jordan.
Yes.
And, you know, people have said, oh, Jordan will never accept this. But you know what? They aren't going to have a choice, because everything else is sort of being ruled out. And there is going to come a time when, if not more, there will at least be a federated state of the Palestinians, which will be inclusive of the East Bank and all of Jordan. And Israel will be able to retain this tiny piece of land in the world that it has. There is no other solution. Maybe when there is a reform of Islam in a couple of 100 years, and they separate the jihad or hate from the religion and from the politics of their people, maybe then there can be talk about having another state. But at that time, I don't think it'll be necessary, because they will no longer, Allah willing, they will no longer hate non-Islamists.
Well, the indoctrination is on the level of children in school books and so on. It's getting worse as we go, because these children grow up and become teenagers and suicide bombers and zealots of all sorts because of their early training. Can something be done?
You know, there are many studies being done now, very expert studies that are taking the school books, they're taking the infant, literally infant indoctrination. Mm-hmm. They're taking the camps, the children's day camps of the Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank. Never mind Syria or Egypt or Lebanon or any of the Arab countries, because of course they all have the same training. Certainly Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the initiator. But the tiny children are being taught to hate, not just on an emotional level. They're taught to kill. And this is threatening the entire society that we live in.
Yeah, it's not just the Jews. It's Americans. It's the West. It's the free world.
Yes. And the Saudis are the greatest perpetrators of this. They have been paying the Palestinians to kill. They've been giving, now I think it's $50,000. I know Iraq gave money. Saudi Arabia has always given money. The Saudi Arabians, who are the most guilty of spreading hate against Americans and Jews, are the supposed best friends in the Arab world of us.
Yeah, why do they get a free pass? Why do they visit the president's ranch and the White House?
Why is it that in Israel the terrorists are called militants? Why are they never called terrorists? Why are they terrorists everywhere else in the world where they kill? Everywhere, Malaysia, Indonesia, Syria, Egypt, the United States, they're terrorists.
Yes.
And yet the Palestinians, who are the terrorists in Israel, who have been killing the same way they're killing here, are called militants. They're given great status. They're given respect. Why are these murderers given respect in Israel and nowhere else? Does that mean that there's a special law for Jewish victims of terrorism?
It certainly sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it also gives one pause when one realizes that in the Iraq war, early on, after we stopped the official fighting, even though we have a bigger war going on now, the Iraq war brought many what they called foreigners. Now, in the beginning of this Fedayeen war against Americans, about 2 months ago, it stopped. They were calling them Palestinian invaders. then all of a sudden it stopped totally.
Mm-hmm.
They never refer to them by any name other than foreigners or invaders.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
We're protecting the Palestinians again.
Why?
That's
You tell me.
That's what I don't know. It's almost a spiritual problem. If you want an answer like that, I can tell you it seems that the more distant people are from God, the more they hate Israel and the Jews and all the evidence of God at work in the world. And Islamists are pretty far from the real God as far as I can see it. That's a Christian view.
But the Palestinians are not really largely Islamists. They're haters, but they're terrorists on a different level.
You know, that's true. I don't find them very religious when I travel in Israel. There are mosques in the villages, but I don't think they're very well attended. Typically, there's a village of 10,000 people, say, and there's one minaret.
Right.
Small building. It won't hold the town. It won't hold 1/100th of a town. They're not very religious people as much as we hear from them about religion.
No, they've been bred to hate, Zola. They've been bred to hate, and it's very sad because they started out, you know, the 12-year-old Palestinian doesn't know that his family came from Sudan or from Egypt or from Lebanon, or that they didn't have the right to this country, that they are stealing the right from a people who has been shunted around from time immemorial. They don't know that. They are taught that their land is where the Jews are, and they want to kill the Jews. And this is what they're taught.
Now, this right of return, they're not only taught that, but they are taught that their families were chased out of Israel by the Jews, and now there are millions of them in the next generation and the next generation, and they have a right to return now to Israel. What's your take on that?
Well, that's got a lot. You have to hear some background on that.
Yeah.
That has to do with getting back to the myths and this one basic paragraph. Because the right of return basically is the terminology of the Jews for their land after the Holocaust and after having been in pogroms and having lost the Jewish state when the Romans destroyed it. Mm-hmm. That has the right to return in context. The right to return, as the Arabs are using it now, is a complete robbery of the language and the ideas of the Jews. The right to return does not apply to Arabs because they have no right to the land the Jews are in. They never did own the land. They never did have a tradition on the land. They had no peoplehood. This is totally fabricated. And it must be understood that because it's a Jewish state, the Jewish state cannot be robbed of its heritage. That they say two rights and two with one state. It's not true. It has been fabricated. The Arabs' right is only to go to Jordan if they want to, or go and live in any one of the many millions of miles of territory that the Arab lands encompass in the Middle East. But the Arab League has used and abused these people. They've made them into human bombs. You know, when I wrote my book, I called them human bombs. I called them that virtually. I didn't mean that they were going to be real bombs. It never, in my wildest nightmares.
Oh, you wrote it a while back.
Yes, but they are human bombs, literally.
Yes.
And they've been created by the Arab world to mask the hatred against a Jewish state in their midst. And now, it's not just in their midst, it's in America, because they've got the Saudis egging them on. It's all about inciting. And these Palestinians have been incited into a belief that they can only be happy and get an identity, which they never wanted, by the way. Mm-hmm. According to D.H. Lawrence, they never wanted an identity. But they want it because the world has made them want it. And that's the sadness.
You mean T.E. Lawrence, I think. Lawrence of Arabia, is that who you're
Yes,
referring
did I
to?
say
Yeah.
D.H.?
Oh,
yeah.
God. That's okay. No, I know what you're referring
T.E.
to.
Lawrence
He found them hard
Arabia.
to make into a people also.
Well, he found it impossible, but
yeah.
he said one very important thing. He said, it's a good thing that there are no natural resources in the Arab world, lest I would find it very troubling to try and build them into a force.
Huh.
And then came the oil.
Then came the oil, and they had all the natural. Well, the Europeans seem to support it, and the British. Even over to Malaysia, you get all this anti-Semitism and implication that the Palestinians deserve the land, etc. What do you make of this? These are civilized people, supposedly.
The rife hatred of Jews, Semites, Jews, in the world has been revved up. I'm not sure what's the biggest force behind it, but I can tell you that I was doing research for 10 years. I saw a lot of anti-Semitism in the books of pages of history. Mm-hmm. I never saw anything the likes of what's happening today, not even in Hitler's day.
It's spread out so far now.
I wonder if the pendulum will swing so far and then come back the other way, because I can't believe, I don't want to sound like Anne Frank or Pollyanna, but I can't believe that people in the media, that people like me, people like you, who are still indoctrinated by the phony handouts that the State Department gives, or the textbooks that are wrong, I can't believe that somewhere along the way they're not going to say, whoa, there's something wrong here. They have to believe that something's wrong along the way.
Something's wrong here, Joan, and that is we're out of time. It's so fascinating to talk to you. The time goes by like like nothing, and it's time that we wrap up. But thanks for coming, and I want you to stay for a second program, and we'll show that one next week and go on with this discussion. She's Joan Peters. What can I say? She's source material. She understands the entire situation. I may sound biased, and so on. Maybe I am biased, but she is a researcher who has gone there, done the work, found the facts, and is here to relate them to you. And as you listen, Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Our offer on this program is the expanded TV airing schedule with a full-page declaration for each of our networks. This handy guide provides the airing day and time by zone for PAX, ABC Family, TVN, Dish, and DirecTV. Or you can see it at Zola's website, www.levitt.com, by clicking on US TV Schedule. And for a concise biblical perspective of our times, ask for the Levitt Letter, a free monthly update on recent events in Israel and the Middle East. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-WONDERS. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. On the internet, visit Zola's website at www.levitt.com. Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you. Please see Zola on Internet TV at www.levitt.com.